So I know that this morning's exercise was a little unusual with the 13-minute days and all, but didn't it feel familiar to you? This is what we want to explore in this workshop. Why does this story keep happening? I mean, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I've got a good idea. Why don't we recreate the same old story again? Notice that this familiar story is not bad, though. You still manage to get out product, and that's because we humans are good at organization. We create organizations that generate remarkable products and services, and yet there is this negative story that keeps happening. So that's the question we want to get into now. How come this familiar story keeps happening in organizations? And if we can get clear about that, then maybe that will help us explore the next question. What else is possible? Sounds empowering, right? What possibilities might this open up for us? Okay, so let's get into it. There are certain predictable conditions that will occur at the top, on the bottom, in the middle, and amongst the customers. And whoever enters those positions will find those conditions waiting for them. Those conditions will exist with or without us. And as human beings, there are certain predictable reflex responses we make to those conditions. Not all of us, not every time, but with great regularity. And once we make those responses, they take us into the familiar, disempowering experiences of life in organizations. That's the overview. Now we're going to look into this in a little more detail. When we're tops, we find ourselves in overload. Lots of inputs coming at us, difficult inputs, and unpredictable inputs. We find issues that we thought we took care of but have come back. And there's too much to do and not enough time to do it. Oh, and we're responsible for it all. And the more turbulent the environment is, the greater the overload is on us. When we're bottoms, though, we find ourselves in disregard. Things that are wrong with our condition and with the condition of the organization. Things that higher up should be taken care of and are not. And the more turbulent the environment, the more disregard we will find. When we're middles, we find ourselves in crunch. Tops and bottoms have their agendas, which are often different from one another, and each is trying to enlist us on its side. The more turbulent the environment, the greater the overload on tops and disregard of bottoms, the greater crunch will be on middles. And in an organization in which tops are facing overload, bottoms are facing lots of untended problems, and middles are facing crunch, there is a good chance that when we're customers, we'll find ourselves in neglect, where products and services are not coming at us when we want them, or to the quality we want, or at a price we're willing to pay. And the more turbulent the environment, the greater the customer neglect. As human beings, we have fairly predictable reflex responses to these fairly predictable conditions. Not all of us, not every time, but with great regularity. Put any of us into the condition of top overload, and our reflex response as human beings is to suck up all of the responsibility to ourselves and away from others. And then it starts to become crystal clear to us that it's our responsibility to resolve all of the complexity. The more important the item, the more powerfully we suck it up. And we don't think about this. It's not a choice we make, but we just do it, like a reflex. Just put any of us into the condition of top overload, and we will suck up the responsibility to ourselves and away from others. Not all of us, and not every time, but with enough regularity to keep the familiar story going. And once we suck it up, the familiar experience we create for ourselves is one in which we are burdened. We feel overwhelmed and anxious. There are all of these things we know we should be doing, and we're not doing them. Or we feel like we're not doing them well enough. What about the bottoms? Put any of us in this condition, and bottoms will feel disregard. Wherever there are problems in our condition or in the condition of the system, our reflex response is to hold the higher ups responsible from our condition and for the condition of the system. It becomes crystal clear to us that it's their business, not ours, to be fixing these things. And we don't think about this. It's not a choice we make. We just do it like a reflex. And once we hold the higher-ups responsible, the familiar experience we create for ourselves is one in which we feel oppressed. We will hold anger, frustration, and disappointment with them for all of the problems they are not taking care of, and for all of the things wrong that they are doing to us and to the system. And then they put any of us into the condition of the middle crunch, where others are pulling us into the middle of their issues and conflicts. And our reflex response as human beings is to slide in between and get torn. Their issues and conflicts become our issues and conflicts. It becomes crystal clear to us that we are responsible for resolving their issues and conflicts. And to understand what sliding in between is, it will help to understand what not sliding is. The middle, who observes the top and the bottom, doesn't say, I wonder how they're going to work this out. That is not sliding in between. Instead, the middle, of course, to keep their jobs, says, I wonder how I can help them work out their issues with one another. But what happens is we slide in between their issues and problems, and their issues and problems become our issues and problems. As a result, we now feel responsible for resolving their issues, and they hold us responsible for resolving their issues. We don't consciously think about it like this. This is not a choice we make. We just do it like a reflex. And once we slide in between, the familiar experience we create for ourselves is one in which we feel torn. We are pulled by those above us and below us, and we don't know which side to be on. Sometimes we become confused, where we don't know what to think, and we don't perform satisfactorily for either side, so we feel weak and indecisive. We basically get negative feedback from all sides, and then doubt from our own competence, and lose our independence of thought and action. Put any of us into the condition of customer neglect, a condition in which we are not getting satisfactory delivery from the delivery systems, and our reflex response as human is to stand aloof from the delivery process. We treat it like a black box we can't enter, and we hold it responsible for delivering the product. It becomes clear to us that the delivery system, and not us, is responsible for getting the delivery we want. Again, we don't think about this. It's not a choice we make. We just do it like a reflex. And once we turn over responsibility for delivery to the delivery system, the familiar experience we create for ourselves is one in which we are the righteously screwed customers of delivery systems. Do you guys see it? Suddenly there's all this anger and frustration from being treated poorly by a system that ought to be treating us well. So here we are. Notice that the predictable response are poor strategies for dealing with the predictable conditions. They do not improve the conditions, and in fact, they tend to make these conditions worse. I mean, is sucking up responsibility a good strategy for reducing workload? No, of course not. It's not going to increase the overload. And is holding higher ups responsible for problems a good strategy for making a problem condition go away? No, it actually increases the likelihood that the problems don't go away. And sliding into the middle of other people's issues and conflicts only increases crunch. It doesn't decrease it. And staying aloof from the delivery process is not a good strategy for reducing neglect. In fact, it increases the likelihood of continued poor service. So this is an interesting puzzle, right? All of these reflexes are poor strategies for dealing with the conditions, and yet we still do them. But here's the real nail in the coffin, the final piece that keeps this familiar story happening with such regularity. It's that it's what we've been saying all along. Predictable conditions lead to the predictable reflex response. which takes us into the familiar, disempowering scenarios of feeling burdened, oppressed, torn, or screwed. And what makes this process trickier is that for the most part, we don't see our part in any of it. Tops don't say, I've got a good idea, why don't we suck up all the responsibility? It just happens. Bottoms don't say, why don't we hold higher ups responsible? Our response is invisible to us. We also don't say, my condition is overload, or my experience is burdened. It all just kind of blends together, and all we know is that we're burdened, or oppressed, or torn, or screwed, and that feels to us like reality. And when we're outside the circle, we feel as if we've had no part in creating these experiences. Feeling burdened, oppressed, torn, screwed, that's our reality. So, how do we explain our circumstances, our experiences? As tops, we are burdened because of circumstances or because of the job, which is true. We are living in overload. But what we aren't seeing is how sucking it all up only adds to our burden. As bottoms, we are oppressed because of them, which may be true. They may be doing or not doing things that create our disregard, but we don't see ourselves as having played any part in creating that experience of oppression. As middles, we are torn because of the job. That's the nature of the middle job. And that's true. The middle position is tearing us apart, but we don't see the part we are playing in creating the experience of torn. Lastly, as customers, we feel screwed because of it, the delivery system, which again is true. The delivery system is not delivering satisfactorily, but what we don't see is the part we play in creating the experience of screwed. So now you can see why tops, middles, bottoms, and customers are experiencing the organization this way. Notice how people or how everyone is under stress, and that everyone wants to change, but change doesn't happen. And it's because in order for change to happen, other people have to change, or circumstances have to change. For tops, the world has to get less crazy. For bottoms, the tops and middles have to become more effective. For middles, the tops and bottoms have to stop tearing at them. And for customers, the organization needs to shape up. There is a common denominator, though, the experience that tops, middles, bottoms, and customers all share. And that's that they feel helpless and blameless. And they feel like they are victims of other people or circumstances. And since everyone agrees that everyone else needs to change, nothing changes. Not really, anyway. And this is the nail in the coffin. Do you see yourself in this? And if so, what does it cost you in terms of your health, the quality of your relationships and partnerships, your effectiveness? And what is the cost to the system?